This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Stefanie Krievins on the show. She is a coach, leadership coach, business coach, and the host of Hot Mess Hotline, which I love the name of that podcast. So we're going to talk about that for sure. She's also the creator of the Change Architecture. We're going to talk about architecture, which we're going to talk about, especially when I'm looking at my industry and, in technology, there's been so many changes recently. We just made it through this great resignation. Now we've got work from home, and now we've got companies pulling people back from working from home and going into this hybrid environment, which we all have to support and figure it all out. So it's a lot going on right now. And obviously there's AI things out there. Anyway, with all that being said, Stefanie, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and kind of how you got to where you are today and why is it that coaching is important to you?
Oh my gosh. So coaching changed my life. Bottom line, my soul was meant to be a coach. And the way that I discovered that was pretty painful. I was on my third job after grad school, early 30s-ish, and had signed up for a Salesforce conversion project with a small nonprofit. I'll say a small technophobic nonprofit. This is 2011, and we had to have staff meetings debating whether or not we should have a Twitter account for marketing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, sweet baby Jesus on that one. And so while I loved the mission of the organization, I also love doing database conversions from the business strategy side. So I'm not a technologist. I just know enough of the language to be dangerous sometimes. But I had an IT consultant who was customizing Salesforce for us, and I combined 17 Excel files over 10 years of organizational history, plus an Access database, plus a fundraising database. It had the architecture of about 1983. Luckily, it was clean data, but there was no consistent data across 19 different files. And I customized Salesforce and combined all of those files into one that had 28 columns wide, 26,000 rows, dumped it into Excel, into Salesforce. And in the process of that, broke my soul. Because while I love the strategy, I love the mission, I asked for one resource, and that was someone to help me clean data, and I didn't get it. And so I spent 4 months by myself on my couch, cleaning data in Excel. And I don't know if listeners can tell after about 30 seconds, I'm a bit of an extrovert. So sitting on the couch by myself is not my work to do. I love that people love to do it, not mine. But it was really very painful. My soul threatened to jump out of its body. I went to go see a life coach who was a friend of mine. I didn't know what I was buying or why I was going to go see him. I just knew I needed help, and this wasn't a problem that therapy could solve. That's not what this is. And within 3 sessions, he helped me become brave enough to say what I really wanted out of my life. And that was to not be an employee, but to be an entrepreneur, to be the person that is valued for speaking up at staff meetings and in all settings, versus, oh no, we keep that hidden here. As a human, I don't know how to not be transparent. And so I'd like to be valued for that, be valued for saying what everyone's thinking and no one will say out loud. That's my charism in this world, unfortunately. And I've learned to do it in much more diplomatic ways in the last 9 years. But then really third was I have this vision for the world and I want to make it happen. So I became a trained life coach 9 years ago. And ever since then, the company has evolved from life coaching and just me to executive coaching and just me. And now there's a whole team of us who we deliver change architecture. We work with IT companies or tech companies and IT functions when they're going through growing pains and change management challenges, because I believe wholeheartedly that the way we've thought about change pre-pandemic will not serve us into the rest of the 21st century.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with that 100%. Everything has, but I think one of the things that is really positive that came out of the pandemic is the fact that we kind of showed from a technology standpoint that we have the ability to change rapidly.
Oh my
Like,
gosh, yes.
like an example of that is I teach part-time at Winthrop University, and I've been teaching there for almost 15 years now. And it was always an in the classroom, lecture type class. Computer science through a lecture is not always the best, but that's what we did. And then the pandemic hit, and within 2 weeks we were, virtual and 100% virtual classes now. And, to have an education institute kind of change things that quickly is really almost unheard of. And the whole country did it. It wasn't just, Winthrop, it was every college in the country.
Yes.
And we all did it right away, and we all did it effectively. And it kind of shows that, we can change a lot quicker and a lot better than we did in the past.
Oh my gosh, I agree completely. That was a turning point for our services as well. Was one, admitting that IT were some of the unsung heroes of the pandemic. Obviously our healthcare folks were first and foremost, right? And our public health professionals. But the things that our IT professionals did in order to equip our businesses to keep running was nothing short of heroic. And then it opened up the possibilities to say, why can't we do that all the time? Like, obviously, we don't have to work at the rush of the scale of a global pandemic, of like a virus spreading around the globe, but why can't we develop our own sense of urgency to fight against not the pressures of a pandemic in order to deliver at speed and on scale? And so IT proved that it was possible versus the projects that were probably lingering on the shelves for 6, 9, 12 months, 3 years, all of a sudden got done because they had to. Why can't we keep up that rate of change? And I realized, we have the tools to help people do that, how to stay ready for change, whatever the next thing is, how to create that internal sense of urgency to deliver at the speed of the business. We know how to equip people to do that. And so let's keep doing that with our IT friends.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And, when you look at how quickly we were able to make massive changes, even, working at a company with, let's say you had 1,000 employees and you all work in the office to now we're 1,000 employees all remote. How do we do that? How do we pull that off, safely, securely, and making people productive?
Yep.
It is, a remarkable change. So why don't we be prepared to always work that way? And I think, some of the things that I've done in the past have helped us get to there. And I think a lot of tech people do this and don't even realize it, coming up with ways to, be more agile. We talk about agile project management, as just one of the methodologies that are out there. But I think just having that in your mindset and being able to say, why don't we just do this going forward? What have you seen after, post-pandemic when it comes to change management and working with change and convincing people that change is okay? Because change is always scary.
Yeah. Can we talk about why it's scary for a second? And then we can talk about what we've done. Yeah, because it's actually a very caveman response to change that's happening in our limbic system in the core of our brain. And so I love to educate people on this because the more you're aware of it, the more you can manage it for yourselves. And so we've got a few different things going on. One is not all people hate change. There's actually 3 different speeds that humans work at as it relates to change. Your early adopters of any initiative, they love change for change's sake. I'm one of those people, right? Like I change out my shower curtain once a year because I just want to look at a new shower curtain. And it's a relatively inexpensive way to drive change, right? But I have to funnel it somewhere. Otherwise it gets funneled into my business and my employees want to get the pitchforks out at me. There's folks that love to evolve with change when they know the why and they know their role. And then there are folks that legitimately resist change, and it takes them 10 years to be able to change. There's benefits of all 3 styles, but I say that to say not everybody hates change. And so one, acknowledge that as a leader, you've got 3 subsets of people that you're working with and talking to. Now, what every human being hates is the lack of or the loss of autonomy. And that's really what I think we're dealing with when it comes to change. I have a client I'm working with right now, and they just merged all their IT functions under one leader. And we're unrolling some systemic changes so that the top level of the leadership, the CIO and senior staff, can get a better glimpse into the data and what's happening with a 700-person organization versus a 300-person organization, right? There's a lot more structure that needs to be put in place. And when we unroll these processes, what people hear is, hey, we're putting in a new strategic execution plan so that we can measure our progress to our strategic plan every 90 days and create focus for you every month, every quarter, every week, every day. What they hear is, oh my God, they're just telling me what to do with my job. There's this strategic plan that's going to set my goals for me. I don't even get to do what I love anymore. Like, our lizard brain gets so freaked out at the loss of autonomy that we interpret it as death. And so as leaders, we have to remember this very extreme reaction to change with some people and really the loss of autonomy. And as a person who's receiving that message where you're like, you feel like a part of your autonomy has been taken away. One, take 4 really deep breaths and calm down. Like, calm down. That's not the message most of the time, if ever at all. And get out of your limbic brain and get back into your prefrontal cortex so you can say, okay, what are they really telling me? And what does this make possible? Not what does this take away? What does this make possible? And so we've got to get folks out of their lizard brain or their limbic brain, which is the first part of our brains as humans that evolved, back into the place that can regulate time and emotions, which is the front of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. Mm-hmm. And you do that through breathing and working out. There's really no other, there's other tricks, but those are the simplest, and right. Oxygen is a great one. And then have a conversation about what does this make possible and what is changing. So we've got to get folks back into that critical thinking mode. So I just love to dispel those myths because I don't believe change is hard. I don't believe everybody hates change because I know otherwise. So that's what we got going on there.
Yeah. Have you ever read that book, Breath by James Nestor?
No, I've not.
Okay. It's an awesome book. It's not very long either, but it's about the science of breathing. And, one of the things he talks about is how what you just said basically is taking breaths and, slowing down your system just to take those breaths and realizing the importance of how you can, refocus energy by taking breaths. It's a really interesting book. It got me doing like box breathing and things in the car on the way to work, just to kind of get myself in the right mind and things like that. But one of the things that you hit on that I thought was really important when you're talking about the autonomy, you're really talking about having the person change perspective. Uh-huh. And, instead of focusing on what is changing, you talked about focusing on what the opportunities that are coming.
Yes.
And one of the ways that I found as a leader that's helpful whenever we're implementing change is transparency. And I know you mentioned that earlier, is being able to, reduce the fear by being more transparent. How much do you work with leaders on that transparency? Because sometimes it's really, like you mentioned at the very beginning, you don't want to work for those companies that are hiding things and you're not free to talk in the meetings and everybody's scared. How do you build a culture of transparency?
Yeah. So part of the work, in my opinion, is baby boomers grew up in an age in business where you held everything close to the vest, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's retraining them and helping them understand and set the definition for transparency in their organization. My Gen Xers, they do love transparency, but we're really, really used to not having it. So we have figured out how to work around it. Millennials and Gen Zers want full transparency. They want to know everything. And they also think they should contribute at all levels of decision making, which is also not helpful. And so what I do is I work with senior leaders on teams to say, okay, based on your business model, and as IT, there's a lot more you can share inside of IT than you can with, say, the finance department or other bits, minus cybersecurity. That's a tough balance, right? Because you don't want to scare the pants off of everybody. Yet we need them to understand the implications of not changing your password from password 1, right? So I know it's super simplistic, but it still cracks me up. And so helping leaders define transparency for their team based on their business and communicating that this is what transparency means. These are the levels of decisions or brainstorming that you can contribute to. Here are the ones that you can't. And I heard this from a leader in my circle. He's a CRO, and he said, you are always welcome to ask me any question you want. That conversation is always completely open. I will not always be at liberty to answer your question. To me, I think that's the best definition of transparency.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, because you're showing them that I'm completely open, but there's always going to be something that isn't on the table, and you're being as honest as you can be with that statement.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I'd imagine in my head that if you do ask him something that's off limits, instead of just giving you like a BS answer, he's going to tell you that's off limits. Just be open.
Exactly. Yeah, don't BS people. Like, don't talk around shit. Oh, sorry, don't talk around stuff. Don't do the word salad, as one client calls it. No, yeah, straightforward and direct.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And that's actually kind of when you mentioned people in my generation, that we've gotten used to getting some of that word salad and getting the runaround. It becomes almost a skill to learn to be direct, and it is one of those things that some people have to get over the fear of being direct, because sometimes you'll have a one-on-one and you have to be direct with the employee and let them know that they're falling behind or they're not meeting expectations as you would want them to be. And it's the easy thing is to say, oh, you're doing a fine job, and just put up with it.
Yep.
The challenging thing is to be direct.
It is. Yeah. And even the most direct of human beings, right? It depends on your personality style. I'm a very direct person. Like, I have to make sure I'm not aggressive. I'm so assertive. Other people are so passive. You're like, what did you just say? Like, I don't even understand what you just said. Yeah. And so if that's your growing edge as a leader, you have to figure out how to make it work for you. Because I think people get confused directness with being mean, and those are not the same things at all. That's why they're two different words. And so as a leader, you can be kind and direct, you can be nice and direct, or my pitfall would be being so direct that I just emotionally blow up somebody because it's like way too blunt.
Yeah, and I've worked with. You reminded me. I guess you were saying that with a vendor that I was working with one time, where we were asking them a question like, "Do these forms get submitted?" or something like that, and they could not say a yes or no. They could not be direct enough. It was just like, "Well, we did this and this and this." I'm like, "Well, did this happen? I need to know. Did this happen?" And they couldn't answer me. And at one point, I kind of blew up. I'm like, "Look, all I want is a yes or no. I don't want another word out of your mouth, but a yes or no." And it's like, now I'm becoming the jerk because I couldn't get a direct answer.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that's what we see in our IT teams too, right? Is like people not internally and externally, but unwilling to admit if they did or didn't do something, unwilling to admit if the process was followed as the way it was designed. Like, that's the really huge gaps that I see in change. I think a lot of leaders think if they just plan it exactly, right? Like, if we just plan the plan with a plan and it's a super detailed plan, everything will go well. And that's not where the rubber meets the road. The rubber meets the road in the transitions of information between people. And that's where a lot of things fall to the wayside, especially with IT folks, because IT folks are thinking about, they're great at tech process. They're not great at people process. And that's where I find they need a lot of support.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of the tech leaders, people we're talking to right now have shortcomings and challenges that I can think back when I first became a manager and I had to not really stop, but I had to transition from, writing code and building processes to building people. And that was a very different approach and a very different way of thinking that I struggled with for, a couple of years for sure, that I was probably a, really bad manager because I thought of things, even people sometimes as just, functions or resources and code that I could, manipulate, if you will.
Yes. It's just another resource to plug in, right?
Right. And people aren't like that.
Nope. No. Turns out we're not robots. Who knew?
Some people are, debatable, but yeah. My wife says I'm a robot sometimes, but anyway. But I do want to ask you a little bit about, this thing, we're talking about people and change, and it's a very difficult thing. Where are leaders going wrong when it comes to making some of these changes and going through these processes? And, especially in the tech field, when it comes to the struggle that we may have communicating and being transparent and being direct, where are some of the areas that we're going wrong?
Yeah. What I see with our clients and IT leaders specifically is we're still overly relying on the command and control style of leadership that frankly is rarely effective. There's still a place for it. Don't get me wrong, but culturally our people are not there anymore, that it's the most effective. And so people are expecting a lot more collaboration, which a lot of leaders hear as, oh my God, that's going to slow our plans down. And I would disagree. I believe we can move at speed and still collaborate. You, as leaders, you have to define what the sense of urgency is on this project and set the context for this, right? And if that's a code word inside of your organization, if that's how fast you drive the meetings, the meeting cadence to get the collaboration accomplished, that's what we have to do, as opposed to, well, I created this plan, or this small group of people created this plan, now go and do. That's actually still a version of command and control. And it just no longer works. And so for the most part, they're always, again, straight up emergency, you need a command and control.
Yeah.
But 98% of our work life is not true emergency, where a server is on fire or somebody's dying, right?
Yeah. So, I agree 100%. And I love the way you said that emergencies, you do need that. Because one of the things that I found is, if you're command and control all the time, it's almost like the boy who cried wolf, and you're not getting, the urgency that you need. But whenever there is, I can think back, several years ago, I was leading a team and we went through a ransomware attack where we had all kinds of things, and we really needed to lock things down. We needed to make, instant, had to make quick judgments. There was no time for collaboration at that point, because we needed to unplug network cords and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I'm not usually like that. I'm not a command and control person. I don't like to just say, do this. I like to hear your ideas. I like to hear, that I'm not this. I don't want to be the expert at everything. I want to be, the strategist. I want you guys to be the experts and tell me what the best things are. But whenever we have a situation like that, it's like, you do this, you do that, you do that. And then they're like, oh crap, we got to, and I think that's a really important distinction that you made there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I love the way you put it. You're exactly right. Exactly right. And the way that I think about moving at speed, is the leader that owns that project just needs to come to their team and say, okay, this is a brainstorming meeting. Here's why this is important. Let's flesh out the results, the process, the people involved, the team involved, right? Yeah. And you can have that meeting on a Monday, and that's 90 minutes. And then you all go back, the note taker drafts up the plan that you talked about. You come back on Wednesday morning and you say, okay, what did we create together? What additional refinements or ideas do we need to add? Okay, knock that out in 30 minutes. The next 30 minutes is, okay, let's think about how this is going to impact other people that have not been a part of this. What might they be afraid of? What might they be excited about? How can we craft communication around that to address those fears? If we still need feedback, the question does not become, what feedback do you have on this project? The question becomes, based on the information you've heard so far, what clarifying questions do you have? And where do you see the value this will bring once we've implemented it or we're done with this project? Please, please, please never use the question, what feedback do you have? Please don't. There's hardly any scenarios where that is a great question. It's just not. Because what you then get is a barrage of everyone's perspectives, and you allow the emotional floodgates to be unhinged on you. Don't do that to yourself. Ask very pointed questions about where you need feedback, because then you invite collaboration that you didn't intend also by doing that. So that's your Wednesday morning. You think through all of that. Thursday or Friday, you get feedback from the broader group that you have to. By Monday or Wednesday of the following week, y'all are ready to roll. That's how you do that at speed. But if you try to create a plan on your own or with just two other people and go to roll it out, you will then spend 3 weeks dealing with the emotional backlash, the questions, the lack of clarity, the resistance, the lack of implementing it. So spend a week and a half on the front end to avoid 3 weeks on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I learned early in my career. We were writing some software for a different department, and my manager at the time wasn't much of a collaborator. And he's like, just go build it, and they're going to use whatever we build, And I'm like, I think we need to communicate with him, and he wouldn't allow us. And this was probably the worst boss I ever had. So we went ahead and basically going into a little room and building the software, and then we go to our group that's going to use it and just kind of roll it out and say, hey, here's your new process. And they're like, this is terrible. They all hated it. So a couple of years later, we had to do almost the exact same project for the exact same group of people. So I took a different approach, And I just started meeting with them early. Say, hey, what would you like to see? What would you do differently? Like, what's the best thing about what you have today? What's the worst thing about what you have today? And let's just address those things. And having them involved meant that they took ownership in it. So when it did come time to roll out, they were very receptive to that change and looking forward to it instead of like resisting, and pushing back. So I think that's what you're saying is, bring people in early.
Yes. And that's a great example. So in your second process, and I just want to tee this up for people, because again, people think collaboration is slow. How long did that process take you?
It was faster. The whole I can go through. We rebuilt the system. It wasn't what we call an assignment system, and we did it twice. The first time it was about a year-long project to do the whole thing from beginning to end. The second time we budgeted 9 months. Now there was some other changes in there, so I want to be transparent about that. The first time we kind of did a more of a waterfall approach where we came up with our own requirements and we built this project and then we rolled it out at once. The second time we did more of a Scrum approach and we rolled out feature by feature and we worked together, but we were completely done in under 6 months. So it was twice as fast and we had far less problems, much better reception. And, the end users of the product were in our stand-ups. They were in our sprint planning. So they were there along the way and they were telling us, like, when we said, oh, what if we did it this way? They're like, oh, that's terrible. Don't do that. Or they're like, oh, that's actually a good idea. And one of the examples is, part of it, the system had like a mobile app for the people in the field that were working trouble tickets. And, the request came in that they could, move the button from closing from the bottom to the top of the screen. And it was a very simple request. We're like, okay, no problem. And then, I just asked, well, why? Why do you want to move it? Like, what's wrong with it being at the bottom? And they're like, oh, well, they close them out at the end of the day. That way they don't have to scroll through all of them. Open one, scroll, close, open the next one, scroll and close. They can just open and close, open and close. I said, why don't we just do a bulk close? When close check boxes and close them all at once. Like, oh, that's even better, And it's one of those collaboration things that I would have never thought of that. They didn't think of that, but the fact that we were talking about it and asking why, we came up with that idea.
Yes. That stuff you can't get over Teams message. You can't get over email. It's through that collaboration. Yeah. And I just want to highlight here, for folks, again, because a lot of top level leaders are like, go as fast as possible, make decisions, go. I'm also not a naturally born collaborator. So I've developed these processes because I've bitten myself in the bum with so many projects, not collaborating, just like that first example that you had, like to balance my need for speed and other people's need for collaboration. And your second example highlights the time saved, the money saved. I'm going to guess the adoption rate was much higher on that second version than the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at it from a business perspective, it was cheaper, faster, better, and, far better received. And we had more functionality, more features, a lot less IT costs because we weren't spending so much time developing on features that nobody wanted. Yep. Overall, just a win-win-win.
Yes. And probably not the 30% of the costs that get added on for people complaining about y'all after the meeting.
Yeah. And also the team, one of the things that, we have a stereotype in technology, especially developers, that we like to be kind of shut up in a room and coding and, everybody leave me alone, let me put on my headphones and code. In reality, they like to be recognized. And it was one of those things where, like, we were in a meeting and, one of the junior developers has an idea and he speaks up and says it. And they're like, that's great. We love that. It encourages him and makes him happy that he's getting recognized for something instead of just, write these lines of code.
Yes. No one wants to be an order taker. Nobody.
Right. Yeah. So it was a really cool experience for the whole team. And, and honestly, when we started the process, I'll be, transparent about that. The first probably 6 weeks, the team hated it. They did not like the customers in there. They felt uneasy, about sharing their ideas in front of the customers. But after they've gotten that positive feedback and were able to go through that process, it became what they wanted to do. And when we started, we said, we're going to do this for 3 months. And if at the end of 3 months, the thing isn't working well, we don't like it, then we'll switch back and do things the way we did in the past.
Yep.
And I would say, probably that 4 or 5 week mark, they were like, this sucks. I'm like, well, we're going to give it 3 months. We're going to give it 3 months. And at the end of 3 months, I'm like, so now we're doing a retrospective. Do we want to go back? And like, no, this is awesome. Let's,
Yes. Every project has that messy middle where you're like, why did we start this? When are we going to be done? Oh my God, I hate this. But that resilience to push through is really key. The other thing I want to highlight about that story is those developers that were unwilling to collaborate. That's a version of transparency and vulnerability that every staff person has to demonstrate. transparency is not just about what the company is doing for employees. It's also about what employees are doing for each other. And that's a version of transparency that increases trust, greases the wheels to, allow people to feel safe to bring up ideas, those kinds of things.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned the word safe right there. And that's one of the areas that we as leaders have to, almost protect our space, in our conversations. Because I had one guy on my team that we ended up having to let go because he was just a jerk. And anytime someone had a question, I said, well, what about this? He's like, well, why don't you not do it like a moron? And then, he always had some kind of comment about, what if you would code like a intelligent person, and it made everybody kind of
behavior.
Yeah, everybody was fearful for speaking up and asking for help from him because he's not going to just help you. He's going to help you, but he's going to make you feel like an idiot while he's helping you. And, and after many times of coaching him and trying, eventually it's like, look, you're the best developer on the team, but you're not a team player. And that's just bringing everybody down.
Oh, yeah. Good for you for making that brave decision. It sucks in the moment, but yes, the toxicity, the distrust, the tearing apart of the team is unbelievably powerful. And I'm guessing the week after he was gone, it was.
Yeah. And it's like, whew, now we can get back to life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So, I think we've hit a lot of topics. Is there anything else in change that you want to that we're missing that's really important for leaders to be aware of?
Here's my soapbox that I get on every single day. Do not underestimate the power of powerful meetings to drive change. And I know that sounds counterintuitive where we have over freaking indexed on meetings in our cultures especially after the pandemic, but to learn really great meeting facilitation skills and to turn the most expensive use of time in an organization, right? Like think about the math of what it just costs for someone to have their bum in a seat in a meeting. That meeting must deliver 4 times the value of what it costs the organization. And so meetings, when done right, drive change with collaboration, with results, with process, with clarity. And that's a skill that all leaders can learn. I'm deeply passionate about it. I teach it to all of my clients because I don't understand why we use the excuse of, I have to sit in another meeting. 1, no, you don't have to. 2, there's a much better way, an effective way that won't leave you feeling so irritated with your colleagues. Mm-hmm. But meetings can be unbelievably powerful in driving change if you have the right skills.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's one of the things that we need to do as leaders is to go back and figure out which meetings are important. Mm-hmm. And if they're not important, let's not do them. And if they are important, but we're not getting the impact, let's figure out why. Why aren't we making this? Why isn't this meeting important? Shouldn't it be?
Yes.
And make it an important meeting, whether it's, having everybody talk, changing up the structure a little bit, doing a retrospective and figuring out why people aren't getting value out of it. Whatever that is, I think that's really important. I remember a time where I had a CIO who was a really good one too. And we were in a meeting, we were talking about something and he brought this, he talked about the expense of meetings. It's, as a early, new manager, I never really thought about it. I just thought, let's throw a meeting on the calendar. And I went in there to have a meeting. We were talking about this. I think it was like $5,000 that we were going to spend on something. So I invited myself as a manager, one of my developers, 2 other managers that were in there, the security team and the CIO. And we're all there talking. And he sits there and I tee up the meeting. We start talking about it. And about 10 minutes into the meeting, he just stopped and said, look, right now, this meeting is costing us like $2,000 an hour to sit here and talk about this. Mm-hmm. Plus the opportunity cost that we're not getting out of this because you're not writing code right now.
Yep.
You've already wasted your money. Just buy it and move on. It would have been cheaper for you just to buy it and tell me about it after the fact.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. And if folks are following the news, what Stripe has done recently they've built a calculator into their meeting, into their calendar.
That just counts up.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's, aggregated data, right? Like the average.
Yeah. It's loaded average. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but it's a really helpful reminder. And I actually built the same thing about a year ago, that I share with our clients because it's not about us being resources in our company. It's not that our value is completely defined based on our wage, but at the same time, if we're not bringing value to our company, there's something wrong with the way we're doing our work or showing up or whatever. And money is a very easy way to calculate value. And if we're not bringing value to our company's not bringing value to the world isn't paying the company for the value that we're bringing, which means the company doesn't have money to make salary. So it all is very connected.
It is.
And so I think it's all of our duties as employees to think about that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's one of the things I had to really coach with my managers is that, you come to me with like a $200 question. I'm like, we spent $200 talking about this.
Yep.
Yes. I want you to make that decision. I trust you to make that decision. And, you can ask me if that was the right decision after the fact. I'm happy to coach you on it and talk to you about it. But coming to me beforehand and asking permission is costing more than just making the decision.
Oh, God. Yes. Yes. Preach, John.
Oh, Stefanie, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And how can people hear more from you, learn more about you, and connect with you online?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Thank you. Yeah. So if you like the style of my communication, little sassy, little quirky, little, spitting the truth here, I do the same thing on our podcast called Hot Mess Hotline. We interview executives, mostly IT executives, and they share their hot messes that they've been through. And they walk us through the problems that they've had in their careers and how they've solved for them so that you can learn too. Because we don't have to learn the hard way, right? We can learn from other people's lessons. It's the fastest way to learn. And those hard times make us stronger, make our company stronger, make our team stronger. So that's why I love to bring those lessons to the world. And then that'll take you to my website. If you love the rest of our stuff or the cut of my jib, book a call with me and we can talk about what your team needs. If your meetings aren't working and there's more and more meetings and you don't know why, we can solve for that. If you have a team under you, they're not making those decisions. They're bringing you $200 problems and spending $600 to solve it. We know how to figure that out for you. So I'd love to talk about those challenges and know that there are skills and tools and new mindsets that we can equip your team with to drive change while being transparent, while being collaborative. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I really appreciate that. I'm going to link all that up in the show notes too at geekleader.com. And I know we've had some of the same guests on, so I think our audience will really get a lot out of it. So hopefully they'll also tune in. I really appreciate having you on.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.